So let me go ahead and keep these the way they are. And let me go ahead and get these blocks put back in. And this is already cooling down, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay. So let me go ahead and do that. Also, when putting these blocks in, you want to make sure that they're flush and together, so that they're placed and they're right. Usually these wooden pieces that are on both sides of the 3 blocks kind of keep the blocks in placement. But sometimes these things fall out or whatever, and they're not necessary, but if your accordion doesn't have them, you just want to make sure that the blocks are lined up so that they can be perfectly lined up over the holes. And there's not any problem. They're usually the blocks are flush together anyway, so it kind of keeps them in place. So and you don't want to over tighten these either. You just want to make sure that you don't want to put too much muscle into it. So that is there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the box. Inside the box, and of course, as you can see, I removed the base blocks out of this box. You don't necessarily have to do that, but and of course in Tex-Mex music, you know, when you're playing with a band, not unless you're self-accompanying. But when you're playing with a band, you don't necessarily need the bass blocks. And a lot of times, it just makes it easier. It doesn't weigh down the box as much. So I tend to remove them. My father always removed them because he doesn't necessarily play the bass blocks, especially when you have a band. But of course, everybody is, every box player is different. So now, I'm getting my nails here. This is for the box, and putting these back in. And usually just kind of, you don't want to jam them in there, but you have to apply a little bit of pressure. Alright, so now I can test out that replacement reed and see what it sounds like. A lot of times when that happens, it's usually because of the faceplate, and I had to kind of remove the faceplate on here, so sometimes it's the faceplate because there's actually 2 stems that hold this faceplate from being flush against the back of the button. I don't know what this is even called, but and this box tends to go away once I can just sort of smooth this plastic area out, this faceplate. So let me see if I can do that. It's just small adjustment. So what I'm kind of doing to get rid of that sound, I'm tapping it. Not too hard, see. I've had this issue before with accordions, so that's good. Still having this. There it goes. Now it's gone. So now I got to the point where this adjustment, I just there it goes. So now I replaced this button right here. There's a slight little warble. So if anything, I'll probably fine tune that. That's perfect. Oh, I can still hear that. No, let me fix this really quick. That's the way it's supposed to sound. One note. So I'll be adjusting that with a little fine tune. Alright, so I removed the faceplate from here, and where I'm getting that leaking sound is pretty much this note. And one of the reasons that usually tends to happen is because on the bottom of this faceplate here, there are two stems that go down and hold, you know, like I said, they hold the faceplate up so that this doesn't collapse inward. And a lot of times, you know, that this one note just happens to rub and be right next to those stems. So a lot of times, you know, I usually just make sure that this is also like solid. And that's the way it should be right there. There shouldn't be any note leaking, so it's just like small minor adjustments. See, there it goes. So now, since the faceplate is off, I can just go ahead and just demonstrate. These are going to be the three different rows, 3 different notes that I'm going to be replacing. On the G is going to be, and then here on the C row, and then on the F row. So these 9 notes are going to have the octaves added, and that is, once those are in place, that's what you consider jazz tuning, because that's pretty much how my father he would modify this. My father came up with this modification tuning way back, probably like early 70s to late 70s, and he introduced this to Horner when he got invited in 1989 to Berlin, Germany, and he was invited also to Trossingen, where the Horner factory is in the little town of Trossingen. And yeah, pretty remarkable story. My father got to go and be there for 2 weeks and do a cool workshop out there, and and that was the first time that they that Horner actually made a signature accordion for an artist, and it was the Steve Jordan Tex-Mex accordion. So that was in 1989. It was an incredible milestone. But at the time, you know, he was modifying his accordions, and I'm sure other box players. I believe Valerio Longoria also modified his accordions, and instead of just doing a certain number of notes, I think he actually modified, you know, all the rows, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, you know, it was definitely the accordion is definitely an experimental instrument. And you know, and I'm sure, you know, other people have done some incredible things by, you know, modifying the tunings on these boxes. But that's why I consider them to be sort of like the you know, when the accordions were really popular, especially the button accordion. You know, it was sort of like the what the electric guitar is, you know, to us. It's the original, you know, rock and roll music instrument, I guess. Even though probably it wasn't, you know, necessarily. I mean, my dad played rock and roll with it, but you know, this was like the popular instrument of the times. So that's a whole other history lesson there. So yeah, so this is how it sounds. Okay, so that's the before, and then I'll be playing it for once I've already done these modifications. So that's the next step. So here we go. Alright, so I have my 3 octaved reeds here, and these are going to be the reeds that I will be replacing. It's to the low end of the accordion. These are your half notes, so these won't be an octave, it will be these 3. With these 3. And I'm just going to double check and make sure that they're in the right order before I start removing any of these reeds. Let me see. Yep, that's the same note, just an octave higher. Alright, so this will be my first reed. I can start here or start here. Either way, they have to be replaced. So, and I'll do the same thing like I did the replacement. You know, I'll get my razor blade and I'll just kind of carefully unseal the reed, remove it, and then carefully place these in there. And then once I have the reeds in place, then I can go ahead and add my beeswax and then reseal it. So that's going to be the process here. So let me go ahead and get this out of the way. I don't need the soldering tool at the moment. So go ahead and set this over here. And I'm gonna keep the accordion grill off in the meantime while I'm doing this, just in case. Alright, let me get to it. Alright, so I removed one reed off of here. Sometimes it's a lot easier kind of to do this all in one. I mean, usually I'll just remove all 3 reeds off of here and then replace them. But just also so it doesn't get confusing, just take my time with this. Like I said, you want to just clean off any excess wax because we're going to be resealing it with fresh wax. So you want to just carefully take that off. Like I said, if it's like oversaturated, use alcohol. it helps. So all I'm doing is just kind of pulling off any of this wax that's here building up. Just kind of removing it without cutting into the wood block. And the razor blade and your fingers are going to tend to get sticky since you're working with beeswax. So that's why it's a good idea to have the alcohol and a you know a cloth rag on hand. But yeah, so right now all I'm doing is just kind of cleaning up the area where the reed sits without cutting into the wood. And yeah, just being very careful. So now that that has been removed, I am going to be replacing it with this reed right here. And if you notice, there is a gap on the reed, on the hole of the block. So I can either use beeswax to seal the gap, or use a piece of leather, a little, if you use wood, you would have to make sure that you have a small little piece of wood that just that covers that, and you might want it like super thin, like you need like a plywood piece or something. But usually most of the times it's I was taught to use little patches of leather patches. So let me go ahead and find some of that. I have some of that here somewhere. Go ahead and cut out a small patch of leather. Okay, well, I decided not to use a leather. If you do have thin strips or like thin extra leather, that'd be great. But I found sort of like a cardboard style piece of paper. It's pretty thick, not too thin. And I'm gonna just go ahead and cut out what I need to cover that little gap. And with this and the wax sealing the reed, I think that should be enough, because of course the wax is going to seal the whole area, and you just want to make sure that the piece of paper covers the area that's needed. In this case, it's just a small little gap like that. So I'll just go ahead and I'm using kids scissors here today. So I'm just getting a little piece like this. And I don't want, I don't want it to overlap, so I want to make sure that I have just the right size piece. But you do want it to overlap the gap. So in this case, you want it to, I need to cut off the excess. Should be about the right size. If not, I'll recut it. See. So, in other words, this will fit right over the piece, over the gap, right there. And once I add wax and do the resealing, that should be covered up pretty well. Like I said, sometimes, when you apply octaves and the reeds are much smaller, because in this case, these reeds are actually bigger, the octaves. But I know in the past, when my father would replace these octaves, sometimes all he had was the actual octave, which is probably about this size. Or if it's this one, it'd probably be about this size. Which would make sense because, these are your octaves, right? And and as you get to the to the other blocks, the reeds do get smaller, so the gaps probably do get a little bit bigger. But yeah, like I said, I'm choosing to use paper, a good stock cardstock paper that I found here that'll work just fine. But yeah, you can use leather, even sometimes just cutting out a piece of just an old leather belt or something. I think this would be just too thick to go on there, but it will work if I needed it to also. So if I needed to use this, I just same thing, just cut out, I wouldn't be able to do it with this, but with some sturdy scissors or a razor blade, cut out the same size as needed to cover the gap, and then with the wax you'd be sealing it. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just try this because it looks promising. So now that I have that kind of in place and the reeds in place, once I seal it, that should probably about do it. So I can also tell. So now that I added the octave, I notice I can hear the difference. It's going to sound the same note, but you'll notice it once we've already applied it and done the sealing on it. So let me go ahead and keep continuing on. And also, if I don't want to make sure that the reed stays in place, I can go ahead and add the wax now, the same way that I did the previous reed. Go ahead and just like clear the old reed over here with the old wax, and then do the same thing. A strip of it. And I'm going to want to apply. And do the same thing. I'm going to apply the wax over the spot. And in this case, since there's a gap here, I'm going to obviously use more wax for the sealing. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And right now it's not necessarily, I don't think it's that necessary to go over and just like redo the sealing, since I'm going to be pulling out these other reeds and doing the same thing. So as you're going through the process now, I'm going to be doing the same thing, doing the second reed carefully, and the excess wax. As you can see, same thing, just being very careful not to cut into the block, but just unsealing the wax. There you go. And keep these handy in case if anything happens with these, with any of these reeds, or you need replacements. You always want to know where these are at. These will come in handy if you need to put them back on, just in case. And the same thing. I'm just kind of cleaning the areas here. Same thing, just being very careful. As you can see. Yeah, and then, like I said, when you're working your wax, if you can see, you get pieces of wax on the blade and on your fingers and stuff. So it's good to have that alcohol handy, because it'll definitely take the wax off of, you know, any of the residue. And also, you know, make sure you don't want any wax pieces or anything inside of the wooden block. Any debris or anything like that. Sometimes I'll just go in there and just kind of clear anything that's in there. This is a good time to apply some alcohol to my fingers and to the blade and clean it. Yeah, and I'm sure other people have other methods of doing this, but like I said, this is just the way I learned. Performing every Friday at the famous venue Salute in San Antonio, Texas. And any given night, that accordion just might need to be repaired. So yeah, you have to always be ready for that. Okay, so now I clean my fingers, I clean the blade, keep that on hand, and yeah. So I'm just continuing, just trying to clean this area as best as possible, not going too much. Same thing for like in these little crevices. It's good to kind of clear them since we're going to be applying fresh wax, as you can see. Even like this right here, you can see. Here. All right. So now I can now that I got that clear and clean, I can go ahead and add the next reed. It's in the order. Make sure that's right in the center of the gap. And you can also see the edges lining up. You want the reed to be pretty much flush in the center. There's just a small little gap, like, you know, and they're all even. You know, all the reeds are in this pretty much in the same position evenly. So that's also a good guide, you know, with your eyes. So once I get that in there, I kind of give it a little pressure on the top. Try not to also mess with these papers, because these things tend to fold and bend, and that makes another difference. You know, you might have a note sounding kind of weird if you happen to damage these little papers, and that's another process, replacing them. You know, sometimes you can, you know, you have to order the little papers and then do the same thing, you know, put little beeswax underneath them and seal them. Or sometimes they just have like an adhesive here at the top, and they're pretty much just like the air. They regulate the airflow in where these gaps are. So, and also if they're bent and stuff like that, you'll hear like little distinct differences in the note. So you always want to be very careful not to damage those whatsoever, because then you have more issues to deal with. Been there and done it. So now I'm gonna just go ahead and do the same thing. I'm gonna just get another piece, size it up, and cover it. So in this case, I just need to cut a small little edge of it. So should work just fine. Just apply it over the gap. Like I said, once I seal the reed, there's going to be wax over the whole area and over this paper. As you can see, I put enough wax on there to cover up pretty much the whole face of the paper. That's just it's just patchy. It's just like a patch. Like I said, leather works the same thing. If you were to cut leather pieces, you would be sizing it up just the same. And I'll know right away if this is a good idea or not, because when you do play the instrument, you'll hear the differences. But in this case, this is hard enough cardstock that it would work as a seal. Leather, like I said, is just kind of like the ideal thing if you happen to have it. But in this case, I'm going to be using this. And with enough wax over that seal, it'll be just fine. Same thing. Here where this paper is, just put one right here, flush against the reed. It's going to keep it in place. And I'm gonna apply more, but also at the same time, when you melt the wax properly over this whole area, it'll flatten out. It'll kind of get flush. This is kind of a sloppy job, but you'll see what I'm talking about once I do the sealing. At some point, I'll reseal the whole thing, and I'll just like run the heat along the whole thing, so it just kind of gives me an all-around solid seal. I'll even be putting wax on the seals on the tops of the reeds, along the edge of the wood block, that way. So, like I said, just be very careful not to touch or damage these papers with the heat gun. That's kind of like the thing. I usually just kind of stay to the edge as I'm going this way on the block. So but that's you'll see that when you're on the final process. Right now I'm just kind of doing the replacements here, and so that's there. And then one more. You can see that the razor blade's already caked up again, so I'm gonna go ahead and just still have alcohol in here, hasn't evaporated, and I'm gonna use this to clean off the blade. And maybe thing on my fingers. All right. This is what I found. It's just like a cardstock paper that seems to be pretty firm and sturdy. Like I said, ideally is leather, but the leather belt that I have is a little bit too thick, I think, and I would need a pretty good set of scissors or shears to cut into that, extract leather from this, even though it's been done, as you can see. So now I'm going on to the third and final read of this block. Remember, I still have 6 more to go. So I'm just removing wax. Yeah, and as I'm explaining this, I'm also doing the time lapse, so you don't have to sit here and watch all of it. So let me go ahead and get to it. Okay, so now that I got those sealed, now I'm going to go ahead and add wax to the top part of this. My son Jewel just woke up from a nap, so I'm doing this and also cooking at the same time. So, yeah. So I'm just getting my wax like that and just kind of rolling it up. Like I said, you don't want to overdo too much wax. You want to be able to have enough to cover all 3 seals on here. And then of course I'll also be making some thin pieces of wax to fit into the 3 slots in between the reeds here. So this is kind of what I'm doing right now. And also keep the old reeds. I'm gonna put them right back into this paper so I can not lose them and not get confused about, you know, these are the 3 G lower octave reeds that I just pulled out in the same order. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put a piece of tape on this and keep them with my other reed sets. But yeah. I am rolling this out. And just applying it right over the top of the reed. Just like that. Same thing with this. And then when I do seal it, I want to make sure that as I'm sealing the areas, I keep this upright because the wax, of course, will flow downward into the crevices, and you don't want it to go this way. You don't want it to go towards the reeds or the papers. You want it to stay against the wood and even that out. So I'll kind of like angle the block this way, and I'll go from one direction to the other and let the wax kind of just drizzle down so it can make a good even seal. But for now, I got this process done, and this is just 1 block to go. 1 block down, I mean, 2 more to go. As you can see, I have these pieces here. You know, and as I'm evening out the beeswax, it'll kind of flush out. It'll go flush, but you also gotta work the block because gravity. Gravity and liquid tends to happen here when you're working with beeswax and you're melting it. So might even just use some of this old beeswax that I had on here previously and do the same thing. And, and in between this process, I'm checking on the food. So in this last read, I'm just gonna. I notice this part needs a slight bit So next, I'm gonna make some small thin pieces for the three little gaps in between these reeds. Oops, be careful not to cut. Yeah, also working with these blades, you gotta be really careful not to cut yourself. I've had my experiences in the past. And it's better to be really cautious about that. As you can see. You know, and take your time. It's no rush when working with this. It's better that's well done. Even though in the past, yeah, when you're under the pressure and working between performances, you kind of have to work really fast. But those are days in the past. And a lot of times, you know, these blocks already have enough wax on them that you'd be able to do that process pretty easily if needed. That's just how I had to learn. The Esteban Steve Jordan School of Accordion Repair and Tuning. 101. Like I said, not too much, just enough. And your fingers will get sticky with working with beeswax. So, like I said, it's good to have that alcohol and that cloth on hand. And then be careful with those papers. Just right. And then one more. And for these other two blocks, I think I'm going to just do the time lapse, since I kind of already went through that process, this whole process, you know. And depending on where I'm at in time and food and all that, I might have to also come back to this process of those reeds a little bit later, maybe like in an hour or so, and after picking up my daughter from school and running some errands. But I'll be sure to leave this set the way it is, so that when I do come back, it'll be ready for me to just continue working on it. That's definitely one of the rules, is, you know, keep the workspace untouched, so that you can always just come back and just pick up where one left off. My babies are pretty good at knowing that. So as you can see, I added it. See, and I'm trying to be very careful not to damage that, you know, the papers. Like I said, it makes a huge difference. And once I do the melting process, you know, just be very careful not to let the wax seep onto any part of the reed or the paper or anything like that. In this case, I'll probably be sealing it. As you can see, there's a little open gap here. So I'll probably be sealing it from here down and allowing the wax to kind of run off into this open gap. And then when I'm sealing this part, I'll have the block angled so that I can allow the wax to run this way. And then when I'm doing these, I'll seal from here really quickly and allow it to run off here and even out. But it also, in case of any wax does get on here, you can always carefully, you know, use the blade and kind of gather up wax. You know, like I said, do not damage, you know, the papers. But it's a hands-on process. So, you know, and that's just the reality of working with wood, wax, and reeds. So it's all, you know, carefulness. But yeah, in case of wax does seep to the reed or to the papers, you can always, you know, kind of clear it off, get that alcohol, and the alcohol will remove any residue or anything that's like bleeding off. So this next video, I'll go ahead and demonstrate the sealing of it. But that's kind of it right there. That's kind of as best as I'm gonna. I have plenty of wax here to go over the 3 papers that I used for the gap sealing. And the rest is just gravity and finesse. It's just knowing how to touch the wax up, not to get it all over the reeds, and working the block and everything, so that, you know, you use, like I said, the once you start melting the wax, it'll start flowing, and then you can just allow it to kind of even out. And you don't want to like overdo it either, because sometimes you might get wax seeping into the gaps and stuff like that. So you just want to just apply it just enough heat and enough pressure to get that going. So that's what I'll be doing here in this next one.